This is an article titled "What is Left Anti-Semitism?" It's by Sean Matgamna, who's I think actually they have a description here, so I need to try to give him an introduction of my own. It's from the Fathom website, and it appears that it's from a book by him called "The Left in Disarray." And on the cover of the book, it has a picture of a sign being held up by marching people that says, "We are all Hezbollah, boycott Israel." And then next to that image is a picture of Karl Marx and Lenin with their hands over their faces in embarrassment. It looks like the book was published in 2017 by Workers' Liberty Press. Yeah, that's all I need to say. This is like a little introduction here. Contemporary left-wing anti-Semitism is first and foremost a denial of Israel's right to exist, and as a result, a comprehensive hostility to pro-Israel Jews that is to most Jews alive, branding them as, quote, Zionist, and seeing that description as akin to, quote, racist or, quote, imperialist, writes Sean Matgamna. In this clear-sighted essay taken from his book, The Left in Disarray, published by Workers' Liberty Press in 2017, he sets out what, quote, left-wing anti-Semitism, end quote, is. Where is it manifested, and what is to be done about it? We would like to thank Sean Matgamna for permission to reprint the essay. Download a PDF here. One second. One second. I want to see if, I'm seeing if the thing I was about to read is longer or shorter than the PDF. So if it's whatever one's longer is the one I'm going to read. Okay, no, it's the same. Sorry for the delay. Section 1. What is, quote, left-wing anti-Semitism? Where is it manifested? What is to be done about it? There are three difficulties, three confusions and obfuscations that stand in the way of rational discussion of what we mean by left-wing anti-Semitism. The first is that left-wing anti-Semitism knows itself by another and more self-righteous name, anti-Zionism. Often, your left-wing anti-Semite secretly believes that he or she is only an anti-Zionist, only a just, if severe, critic of Israel. Second is that talk of left-wing anti-Semitism to a left-wing anti-Semite normally evokes indignant, sincere, and just denial of something else. Quote, "No, I'm not a racist. How dare you call me a racist?" End quote. No, indeed. Apart from an atypical crackpot here and there, left-wing anti-Semites are not racist. But there was anti-Semitism before there was late 19th and 20th century anti-Jewish racism. And there is still anti-Semitism of different sorts. Long after disgust with Hitler-style racism and overt racism of any sort became part of the mental and emotional furniture of all halfway decent people, and perhaps especially of left-wing people. Left-wingers are people who by instinct and conviction side with the oppressed, the outcast, those deprived of human rights, with the working class and the labor movement. We naturally side against the police, the military, and the powerful capitalist states, including our, quote, own, end quote. We are socially tolerant, in contrast to, quote, hang 'em, flog 'em, build more jails, end quote, people. We look to changing social conditions rather than to punishment to deal with crime. We are people who want to be Marxist and socialists and consistent Democrats. Confused as some such people may be, racist they are not. We're not saying that left-wing anti-Semites are racist. The third source of confusion and obfuscation is the objection, quote, you say I'm an anti-Semite because I denounce Israel. I'm not anti-Jewish when I denounce Israel, but anti-Zionist, end quote. And sometimes at this point you get the addition, quote, by the way, I am myself Jewish, end quote. The objector continues, Israel deserves criticism. Even the harshest criticism of Israel's policies in the West Bank and Gaza, and of Israel's long-term treatment of the Palestinians, is pro-Palestinian and anti-Zionist, not anti-Semitic. To equate criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism is just crude and hysterical Zionist apologetics. No. By, quote, left-wing anti-Semitism, we emphatically do not mean political, military, or social criticism of Israel and the policy of Israeli governments. Certainly, not all left-wing critics of Israel or Zionism are anti-Semites, even though these days all anti-Semites, including the right wing, old-fashioned, and racist anti-Semites, are paid-up, quote, anti-Zionists, end quote. Israel frequently deserves criticism. Israel's policy in the occupied territories and its general treatment of the Palestinians deserve outright condemnation. The oppressed Palestinians need to be politically defended against Israeli governments and the Israeli military. The only halfway equitable solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict, a viable independent Palestinian state in contiguous territory, side by side with Israel, needs to be argued for and upheld against Israeli power. Solidarity condemns Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. We defend the Palestinians and champion an independent Palestinian state side by side with Israel. The difference here between left-wing anti-Semites and honest critics of Israel, a category which includes a very large number of Israeli Jews as well as Israeli Arabs, is a straightforward one of politics, of policy. The left-wing anti-Semites do not only criticize Israel, they condemn it outright and deny its right to exist. They use legitimate criticisms and utilize our natural sympathies with the Palestinians not to seek redress, not as arguments against an Israeli government, an Israeli policy, or anything specifically wrong in Israel, but as arguments against the right of Israel to exist at all. Any Israel, any Jewish state in the area, any Israel with any policy, even one in which all the specific causes for justly criticizing present-day Israel and for supporting the Palestinians against it have been entirely eliminated. The root problem, say the left-wing anti-Semites, is that Israel exists. The root, quote, crime of Zionism, end quote, is that it advocated and brought into existence the, quote, Zionist state of Israel, end quote. Bitterly, and often justly, criticizing specific Israeli policies, actions, and governments, seemingly championing the Palestinians, your left-wing anti-Semites seek no specific redress in Israel or from Israel, demanding only that Israel should cease to exist or be put out of existence. They often oppose measures to alleviate the conditions of the Palestinians short of the destruction of Israel. Thus the petitions and chants on demonstrations, two-state solution, no state, no solution. They use slogans like Free Palestine precisely because they can be understood in different ways depending on your definition of, quote, Palestine. Therefore, they can accommodate those who, without having studied the complexities of the history of the Jewish-Arab conflict, instinctively side with the oppressed and outmatched Palestinians, and for whom, quote, Free Palestine simply means simply that Israel should get out of the occupied territories. And it can also accommodate those, like the proponents of the slogan, the political Islamists of the Muslim Association of Britain/Muslim Brotherhood and others, who, quote, define, quote, Palestine, end quote, as pre-Israel, pre-1948 Palestine, and by, quote, Free Palestine, mean the destruction and abolition of Israel, and the elimination in one way or another of the Jewish population of Israel, or most of them. The political differences spelled out here are easily understood, but why is the drive and commitment to destroy Israel anti-Semitism, and not just anti-Zionism? Because the attitude of the Jewish nation in Israel is unique. Excuse me one second. Because the attitude to the Jewish nation in Israel is unique. Different from the left's attitude to all other nations, and because of the ramifications for attitudes to Jews outside of Israel. Apart from a few religious Jews who think the establishment of Israel was a revolt against God, and some Jews who share the views of the leftists whom we are discussing here, those Jews outside Israel instinctively identify with and support Israel, however critically. For the left-wing anti-Semite, they are therefore, quote, Zionists, end quote, and proper and natural targets of the drive to, quote, smash Zionism, end quote. The attitude of the, quote, anti-Zionist, end quote, left to Israel brings with it a comprehensive hostility to most Jews everywhere. Those who identify with Israel and who defend its right to exist. These are not just people with mistaken ideas. They are, quote, Zionists. In colleges, for example, where the anti-Zionist left exists side by side with Jewish students, this attitude often means a special antagonism to the, quote, Zionist Jews. They are identified with Israel. They especially are pressured either to denounce Israel, to disagree with its, quote, racist and, quote, imperialist, and to agree that it is, quote, racist and, quote, imperialist, and that its existence is a crime against the Arabs, or else be held directly and personally responsible for everything Israel does, has done, or is said to have done. In such places, where the left, quote, interfaces, end quote, with Jews, the logic of the unique attitude to Israel takes on a nasty, persecuting quality. In the past, in the mid-1980s, for example, that has taken the form of attempting to ban Jewish student societies. Non-Jews who defend Israel's right to exist are not classified in the same category. But is the attitude of the, quote, absolute anti-Zionist, end quote, to Israel really unique? There are seeming similarities with left attitudes to one or two other states: Protestant Northern Ireland, apartheid South Africa, or pre-1980 white-ruled Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. But the attitude to Israel is unique because the reality of Israel cannot properly be identified with Northern Ireland, apartheid South Africa, or white Rhodesia. In apartheid South Africa and white Rhodesia, a minority lorded it over the big majority of the population, exploiting them. Israel is a prominently Jewish state consisting of all classes. The Jewish nation does not subsist and never has subsisted on the exploitation of Arab labor or depended in any essential way on such exploitation. The general left hostility to the Northern Ireland Protestants, who are not exploiters of Catholic labor and who are the compact majority, if not of the 6 counties, then of the northeast half of the 6 counties, is the closest to the attitude to Israel. But it is not widely believed on the left that the Northern Ireland Protestant Unionists simply have no right to be there. The right of the Jews to, quote, be there, end quote, is denied in those sections of the left that we are discussing. The organization of Jewish migration to Palestine, that was the root, quote, crime, end quote, of Zionism, of which the, quote, crime, end quote, of establishing Israel was only a further development. The, quote, solution, end quote, is not only to undo and abolish Israel, but to reverse Jewish, quote, migration, which now includes people born there to parents born there, and to roll the film of Middle Eastern history backwards. The prerequisite of left-wing anti-Semitism is the catastrophic decline in the culture of the left over the last decades. A decline which allows people who want to be socialist to chant, Sharon is Hitler, Israel is Nazi, and similar nonsense without checking on the words, without pausing to listen to what they are saying or to think about it. The specific framework within which what we have been describing exists, and without which it probably couldn't exist in these, quote, left-wing forms. Is the poisonous and systematic misrepresentation and falsification of the history of the Jewish-Arab conflict and of the Jewish people in the 20th century, we can only touch on that here. In reality, the Jews fled to Palestine, where a small Zionist colony and a small pre-Zionist Jewish community already existed, from persecution in Europe in the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s. In the 1930s and 1940s, they fled for their lives from Nazism, which killed 2 out of every 3 Jews alive in Europe in 1939. In a world in which no non-persecuting state would let them, or enough of them, in, they fled to the existing Jewish national minority in Palestine, a long-established minority, which, though small, was, for example, the majority in Jerusalem in 1900. While Hitler was organizing mass slaughter, Britain shut out Jews from Palestine, interning those who tried to enter. Overloaded, seaworthy boats carrying illegal cargoes of Jews sank in the Mediterranean, trying to get to Palestine. For example, the Struma, in which over 700 people died. Israel was set up by those Jews on license from the UN, which stipulated 2 states in Palestine, one Jewish and one Arab. When the State of Israel was declared in 1948, surrounding Arab states invaded. Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt were then British-dominated, and some of the armies were staffed by British officers. The Israelis defended themselves and won. In the war, 750,000 Palestinians were driven out or fled in the same period and afterwards. About 600,000 Jews were expelled or fled Arab countries. In the Arab invasion of 1948, the Arab Palestinian state was eliminated. Most of the territory went to Jordan and fell under Israeli control in the War of 1967. That was a tremendous tragedy that will only be redressed when an independent Palestinian state takes its place alongside Israel. This complex and tragic history is presented by the, quote, absolute anti-Zionist left as a conspiracy of Zionism, conceived of as a demonic force outside general history and outside Jewish history. It is not rare to find, quote, left anti-Zionists arguing that this Jewish Zionist conspiracy was so all-powerful that it was able even to manipulate Adolf Hitler and the Holocaust, in which 6 million Jews died. See the play by the veteran Trotskyist Jim Allen, Perdition, of which Ken Loach planned a performance at a London theater in 1987. The core idea, the root of modern left-wing anti-Semitism, is that Israel in one way or another is an illegitimate state, and that therefore in one way or another it should be done away with. If its citizens will not be the first in history to voluntarily dismantle their nation state and make themselves a minority in a state run by those whom they had fought for national existence, if they will not agree to voluntarily dismantle Israel and create a, quote, secular democratic Arab state, end quote, in which Israeli Jews can have religious but not national rights, then they must be overwhelmed and compelled to submit or flee by the Arab states, now or when they are strong enough. Beginning with the benign-seeming proposal to sink Israel into a broader Arab majority entity in which, quote, everyone could live in peace, end quote, the chain of logic rooted in the idea that Israel should not have come into existence, that it is an illegitimate state, leads directly, since Israel will not agree to abolish itself, to support for compulsion, conquest, and all that goes with it. Israel must be conquered. Even the work of a writer like Hal Draper can feed into this poisoned stream. While Draper made valid and just criticisms of Israel, he accepted that it had a right to exist and a right to defend itself. He denounced those who wanted to destroy it, but he made his criticism in the tone and manner of a prophet denouncing sin and iniquity. He too thought that Israel was an illegitimate state, that it should never have come into existence and should go out of existence as soon as possible. By agreement, and only by agreement, he believed, but the subtleties get lost. There is nothing to stop someone swayed by Draper's denunciations of Israel and accepting his idea that Israel is an illegitimate state, then impatiently insisting, if not by agreement, then by conquest. And so an increasingly disoriented socialist workers' party could look to a Saddam Hussein to, quote, free Palestine, that is, conquer Israel. The point here is that states and nations are the products of history. There is no such thing as an illegitimate nation or a, quote, bad people, which does not deserve the same rights as other peoples. The anti-Semitic left today, which depicts Israel as the hyper-imperialist power, either controlling U.S. policy or acting as its chief instrument, the story varies, is in the grip of a, quote, anti-imperialism of fools, end quote, and that in practice leads to a comprehensive hostility to Jews not far from what Babel called the socialism of fools. One of the great tragedies of contemporary politics is that many young people whose initial instincts to oppose Bush and Blair in Iraq and to support the Palestinians are initially healthy are being poisoned with, quote, left-wing anti-Semitism. With, quote, left-wing, end quote, anti-Semitism. Quote, left-wing anti-Semitism, end quote, is in short, first a denial of Israel's right to exist and rooted in that a comprehensive hostility to pro-Israel Jews. That is, to most Jews alive, branding them as, quote, Zionists, end quote, and seeing that description as akin to, quote, racist, end quote, or, quote, imperialist, end quote. It accepts only those Jews who agree that Israel is racist imperialism in its most concentrated essence and oppose its continued existence. The general antidote to this anti-imperialism of fools is the propagation of rational democratic and socialist politics. Such politics focus on a political solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict. They measure and criticize Israel and the Arab states according to their stand in relation to that just solution, the establishment of an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel. There is an immediate, quote, antidote, end quote, to left anti-Semitism too, and it is a very important task for Marxist socialists like those who publish Solidarity, which is the pamphlet of the Alliance for, the paper for Alliance of Workers' Liberty, or for? I don't know, Alliance for Workers' Liberty. Relentless exposure and criticism of their politics and antics, without fear of isolation, ridicule, or the venomous hostility of the vocal and self-righteous left-wing anti-Semites. 2. We need to specify that, quote, what, quote, left anti-Semitism, end quote, consists of in order to debate, educate, and clarify. These, I think, are its main features. 1. The belief that Israel has no right to exist. That is the core of left anti-Semitism, though it comes in more than one version and from more than one root, ranging from the skewed anti-imperialism of the orthodox Trotskyists through Arab nationalism to Islamic chauvinism. Advocacy of the destruction of Israel, which is what separates left-wing and Islamist anti-Semites from honest critics of Israeli policy, should not be tolerated in the labor movement and in the serious left. The belief that Israeli Jewish nationalism, Zionism, is necessarily a form of racism. 2. The belief that Israeli Jewish nationalism, Zionism, is necessarily a form of racism. That this racism can only be expunged if Israel, Zionists, and Jews abandon Israeli nationalism in support of any kind of Israel. That Jewish students, for example, can only redeem themselves if they agree that the very existence of Israel or of an Israeli Jewish nation is racist. The view that Israel alone is responsible for the conflict with the Arab states and now with Islamic states. The idea that Israel alone is responsible for creating Arab refugees and is uniquely evil in doing so. In real history, the Arab states mostly refused the Palestinian citizenship or even the right to work. 4. The claim that the Palestinians have a, quote, right of return, end quote. That is, the right to the organized settlement in Israel of 6 million people, only a tiny and dying off number of whom were born in what is now Israel, is one of the many codes for in fact demanding the self-abolition of the Jewish state and justifications for war to conquer and abolish it, because it will not abolish itself. It is not the equivalent of free immigration to the UK or even of mass migration to the UK of millions from Syria, Libya, and Africa. Its equivalent for Britain would be the settlement in the country organized by a hostile authority of 60 million people. Socialists should, of course, be in favor of agreements between Israel and Palestinians for compensation and for letting individual Palestinians pass into Israel. Support for a collective right of return is only another form of the demand to conquer and destroy Israel if it will not surrender. 5. The idea that the forced migration of 70,000 Arabs was a unique evil was also extravagantly wrong. In 1945, 12 to 14 million Germans were driven out of Eastern Europe. They were driven into a Germany reduced to ruins by wartime bombing, where economic life had seized up and millions were starving. Only fringe German nationalists now propose to reverse that forced population movement and to drive out the Poles, Czechs, and Russians, etc., who lived where Germans once lived. There is a peculiar dialectic of Holocaust semi-denial current on the left. I have never heard of anyone on the left who denies that 6 million Jews were murdered by the Nazis, though, in the nature of things, someone will now jump out from behind a bush wearing a, quote, Hitler was framed, end quote, badge and call me a liar. What the anti-Zionist left habitually deny is that this unique fact of history had repercussions that we should at least recognize and try to understand with some sympathy for the surviving Jews and their descendants. On the left, the Holocaust is not denied, but is relegated almost to the status of a, quote, virtual fact, end quote. In truth, the Holocaust discredited all Jewish assimilationist programs, including ours, the socialist one. It created and hardened the will for a Jewish solution to the Jewish question and for the creation of Israel. There is nothing to be surprised at or scandalized by in that. The Holocaust should be appreciated as a real fact of history, with repercussions and reverberations, and not as something outside the history we are all part of, as a sort of sideshow, or a two-dimensional hologram, rather than the enormously weighty, reverberating event it was and continues to be. 7. The idea that there are good peoples entitled to all rights and bad peoples entitled to none. That, too, is something I have never heard anyone voice plainly and explicitly, but it is there as an implicit subtext in the idea that we are concerned with national rights for only the presently oppressed, i.e., in this case, the Palestinians. 8. There is no one-state solution, not as now by Israeli denomination of the whole territory and Palestinians living indefinitely in a purgatory of Israeli occupation, nor through a Palestinian state, quote, from the river to the sea, end quote, incorporating Israel after its Jewish population has been killed or overpowered by Arab or Islamic states. The only just solution that can serve both Jews and Arabs is two states, a sovereign Palestinian state in contiguous territory side by side with Israel. If, as may be possible, a Palestinian Arab state is made impossible by the spread of Israeli settlements. If, as may be possible, a Palestinian Arab state is made impossible by the spread of Israeli settlements, then the future will be grim indeed for both Palestinian Arabs and Israeli Jews.